This podcast is sponsored by nobody.
Hey dudes, this is Juliana Donald, Jenny in the Muppets Take Manhattan, and you're listening to Tommy Throwback Kovac on Splat from the Past. Fun fact, Tommy is a Muppet. You poke his navel and he giggles like the Pillsbury Doughboy.
Hey dudes, welcome to Splat from the Past, the only 80s themed horror sci-fi show where things can get totally radical. Now today I will be welcoming my first American from the Jim Henson camp, because I've only talked to the Canadians. I will be talking to Tim Clarke. Tim Clarke designed Muppets for Jim Henson. He designed Uncle Traveling Matt for Fraggle Rock, and he also was a designer on the Dark Crystal, which turns 40 this year, and it's going to be a great conversation. I can't wait, because it's my first, like I said, he's my first American from the Henson camp, and it's going to be a great conversation because Dark Crystal is such a great movie. Even though I like Labyrinth a little more, the Dark Crystal was like the first one that set the tone to show Jim's dark side beyond, the family-friendly Muppets. And it's going to be a great conversation, and I just cannot wait. And he also worked on the Muppet Show and Sesame Street, but I'll find more about that stuff. And he also has a toy line, of his creations called Totems. And yeah, it's going to be a great conversation to find out, if he's involved in the comic con scene or not. So yeah, here is my interview with Tim Clarke.
Hello.
Hey Tim, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm well. How are you?
I am just spectacular. This is such a great honor. Thank you for taking the time today.
Sure, my pleasure.
Yes, you're my first American from the Henson camp.
First American.
Yeah, because I've only talked to the Canadians.
Gotcha.
So, going back in time, did you gravitate toward puppetry and designing early on in your childhood?
Yeah, I used to do puppet shows for kids in my neighborhood to make a little money. I think I charged $0.25. And I did mostly marionettes at that time.
Yeah. You grow up in the heyday of Walter Winchell and Edgar Bergen and Sherry Lewis and Howdy Doody and all that?
Yes, and Edgar Bergen and, let's see, Bill Baird.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think about who else. Sherry Lewis, Bill Baird, Paul Winchell. There were a lot of them back then. Bert Hillstrom with Kukla, Fran, and Ollie.
Right.
Were phenomenal. Just great stuff.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of influences. And then, of course, later on, watching Muppets on Ed Sullivan.
Right. I meant to say Paul Winchell, not Walter. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Yeah. So you saw Jim do the Muppets on Ed Sullivan. Wow, that's how far back you go.
Yeah.
And little.
Yeah, I remember that, and I never thought in a gazillion years I would end up working for him.
Yeah.
So I thought you had to know somebody in the business that knew somebody who would get you there, and it turned out I ended up, following that path, but never expected it to happen.
Mm-hmm. Where are you from originally?
Mineola, Long Island.
Nice. So after high school, though, did you attend college?
Yeah, I went to Pratt Institute, and I was majoring in art education, and part of that program was, let's see, Kermit Love, who designed Big Bird and Snuffleupagus,
Right.
was teaching a class at Pratt that was on, puppetry, and I got it into that class the last semester of my senior year. Priority was given to theater majors and seniors.
Yeah, you probably didn't have a plan at that point. You didn't probably know what path your career was going to go into after college.
No, I was planning on being an art teacher, but at that time, there wasn't a lot of job openings for art teachers because I was part of the baby boom generation, and the generation after that was quite small.
Mm-hmm. So
they were closing schools. They weren't adding on to school systems at that time. That came later.
That's interesting. I did not even realize that they were closing schools at that time.
Yeah, after the baby boom generation, it was the smallest population increase, I think, in quite a long time in U.S. history. And it wasn't until the baby boom generation started having kids themselves that it went back, the population went back up. So there was a population decrease for, I don't know, maybe the course of 5 to 10 years until the baby boom generation started having kids, and then schools, they had to add on to, they had to build schools to meet the demand. So, yeah, because my wife ended up becoming an art teacher when that boom occurred.
Oh, nice. She's still doing that?
Yes, yeah. We just moved to New Mexico, and she's teaching art on the Navajo Reservation in New Mexico, and to elementary school. She had been teaching high school for many, many years.
Well, this has to be a change of pace for her to go from a school to a reservation.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a brand new elementary school. It's only, I think, 4 or 5 years old, and so far she's loving it. She started the middle of August.
Nice.
A few weeks ago.
Nice. I hope she continues doing that until she's ready to retire.
Exactly.
So after college, how does Jim Henson come into your life?
Well, Kermit, when I was getting close to finishing his class, he asked me what I was doing, and I said, I'm looking for a teaching job, but there aren't any. And he said, well, why don't you come and work for me? So I said, of course. So working with Kermit had the contract with CTW, Children's Television Workshop, to do the Sesame Street characters for all the foreign TV programs. Mm-hmm. So we did Sesame Street characters that would fill in for what Big Bird and Oscar were for Sesame Street in Kuwait, Sesame Street in Germany, Sesame Street in Mexico, and in between that, we did puppets for television commercials at his workshop, and we did a lot of costume design for ballet companies because that's where Kermit had come from. So we did the Picasso Parade costumes for Joffrey, and we built a 20-foot-high marionette for Don Quixote for New York City Ballet. That was really cool. That was a really amazing project.
It sure sounds like it. So then you meet Jim, and then he asks you to...
I didn't meet Jim till after I had worked for Kermit for about a year, and then he told me... I actually was going to go to meet with him to get a recommendation to go and meet with Jim. Mm-hmm. And he was teaching at Pratt that day, and I was standing outside his classroom, and he saw me outside, and then as the class ended, he called me in and he said, Tim, Jim is starting up a new project at Henson,
Mm-hmm.
and I think you would be really perfect for it. So you have an interview with Jim next Thursday. And I said, oh, okay. So I gathered up all the puppets I had made for Kermit's class and all the puppets I had made during downtime at Kermit's workshop.
Mm-hmm.
And I took them up for my interview, and I started pulling them out of the garbage bags I had them in. And Jim said, I really like what you're doing. You're using your hands in a different way and your body in a different way. You're not just doing your hand in a mouth puppet. And because I had created a crab using both my hands and my thumbs were the eyeballs.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had done a sea anemone puppet and a dragon puppet and another really large kind of Chinese dragon puppet.
Mm-hmm.
A whole bunch of different things. And then the fly hand puppet, which was the starting point of Sectors, the toy line that Maureen Trotto and myself did at Coleco. So, which is just being relaunched by Nacelle, which is really cool.
Yeah.
After 35 years.
Yeah.
So they just announced that recently.
And were you intimidated at all?
By Jim?
But yeah, meeting him for the first time.
No, not really. Jim was very kind of quiet and shy, and he was not, he just kind of, as I pulled each thing out, he just kind of looked and, nodded his head and stuff, and then he said to me after I showed him everything I had worked on, he said, okay, when can you start? And I said, tomorrow. He said, no, I got to talk to the people at HR. And then he said, why don't you come back next Tuesday and you can start work then. And that was really the very beginning of Dark Crystal coming to fruition. I think Wendy Froud, who was Wendy Meidner at that time, was there. Sherry Amott, who was heading up the workshop. Dark Crystal was there. Brian had been in New York, but had gone back to England to close up his home or whatever, to then return to New York to start work. And I don't remember really that many other people. Mostly the other people got hired after I started there. And my first work was starting work on the Mystics. They had hired a woman to sculpt them. She decided she didn't want to work on the project. She wanted to concentrate on her own sculpture work, and she quit. And I was like, wait, you're quitting working for the Muppets? I was like, okay. So I later found out that she was from a very wealthy family and didn't need the money. So.
Oh, yeah, that always helps. Yeah, so this movie, The Dark Crystal, this was a huge departure for Jim because, he was well established by this time as a children's entertainer, but it seemed like he wanted to show the world that there was more to his vision and that he could be capable of being dark.
Yeah, I don't know if the intention was to be dark.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was very much influenced by Grimm's fairy tales and, that kind of old world fairy tale, and wanted to produce something with that kind of magic to it. Yeah, it was a big departure, but for Jim it wasn't a big departure. I mean, if you go back and look at the puppets he did for the first year of Saturday Night Live.
Oh, yeah.
They are very much the beginning of what Dark Crystal was moving towards, and the whole idea of doing puppets for adults. And Muppet Show was for adults, yes, kids loved it too, but a lot of the humor in Muppet Show went right over kids' heads. It was really directed towards adults. And certainly the stuff for Saturday Night Live was very much so, them doing that. So
right. Well, yeah, he was.
I think the beginning of Jim going in that direction, and then we just kicked it up a whole nother notch.
Yeah. I mean, it was comedy. He was doing with the Muppets, and this was, the fantasy genre. I mean, even though he was older than George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, he came from that generation of filmmakers who grew up on the matinee serials and the sword and sorcery and pirate movies and stuff, and all those elements were in the Dark Crystal.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I wouldn't know. I have to say, I never asked Jim directly where it came from, but
yeah. So you were the creature design and fabrication supervisor for the Mystics and Slaves. So what necessarily did your job entail?
Well, Jim had gotten Dick Smith to come in and teach us how to work with foam latex, which was up until that point primarily used, for special effects makeup and add-on makeup to people's faces. And we were approaching it with the idea of using it to create puppets. And that was different and unusual. And so we learned a lot from Dick, and Dick kind of went, this is really cool because your hand is a lot more expressive than your face. Your face has very limited movement,
right? And
yet your hand is much broader, so it can be a lot more expressive. So he said, it's great. You guys are learning stuff from us, from me, and I'm learning things from you, which is wonderful. So that was a really awesome workshop, and then basically we started applying that, the foam latex to the idea of making puppets, because before that, most of those kind of puppets at Muppets were carved out of a single block of urethane foam. And it was very time consuming. This way, all the puppets could be sculpted, and then we could make negative molds and cast them and have repeats, readily.
Right. How long did the whole creative process for the movie happen? I can imagine it was probably a couple of years, right?
I think I ended up working on Dark Crystal for a little over 3 years.
Wow.
And of course, that was unheard of back then. But we took breaks. We did Muppet. The one season of Muppet Show, we took a break to do puppets for that, and then we took another break to work on, once we got to England and started production in England, then later on we took a break to work on Great Muppet Caper. So it wasn't, that block was primarily work on Dark Crystal, but yeah.
Yeah.
Were little interruptions.
Were you on set every day?
So we're Dark Crystal? Yes, pretty much.
Yeah.
The first shot that was ever done was the Mystic Valley. That was the first day of shooting. And then we all, when we weren't dressing and setting up for the puppets that we had created, we were helping puppeteer, the puppets that everybody else had created. So whether that was the slaves or the peasant, the pod people, or the Skeksis, because the Skeksis took quite a large crew of people working all the different controls to animate their faces and their hands and bodies. And so it was like a whole hands-on adventure for everybody, who worked on the movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you guys were on location in England. What was it like over there?
Well, the whole thing was shot in Elstree Studios, and the Star Wars movie was being shot at the same time with Yoda, so I got to see all the kind of behind the scenes stuff for that, which was really cool. What else? The Shining had just finished shooting when we went in, and so had Alien with Sigourney Weaver.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the people that had worked on Alien costumers had worked on Alien and then came over to work on Dark Crystal. So like Shirley Denny, who worked on building the alien suit for Geiger,
Mm-hmm.
she came over and started working on the costuming for the Mystics themselves, all that quilted patterning and, all those layers and the tail and everything else. So.
Mm-hmm. What would you say is some of the most challenging scenes to film?
Very, very. And a challenging thing to move around in, too.
Yeah, any specific ones?
The Mystics were very difficult. The Skeksis were just, everybody was standing up, but the Mystics, they had to be in that low squat position.
Mm-hmm.
So the performers had to be walking kind of on the back of their heels. It was not easy, and they were bent over in that position for quite some time. So.
Oh, that's no good.
Yeah, it was not easy.
Did Jim and Frank Oz?
He was young and flexible back then.
Yeah, yeah. You imagine how that would be shot today with CGI? I'm sure that's what they did when they did the remake Age of Resistance.
Yeah. No, I mean the movement of the Skeksis, the Hunter Skeksis, was just brilliant. I mean, it was amazing. I met right before COVID. They had a reunion of everybody who had worked on Dark Crystal at Elstree Studios, and it was the people from the new Age of Resistance plus the people who had worked on the original, and it was great to meet, the new performers. And I said to the guy who performed that Skeksis, I said, I never thought I would see a Skeksis move like that. It was amazing what you accomplished,
Yeah.
And how they blended it with the CGI, which was really, really extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, I'm usually pretty critical of CGI, but I think they did a good job with it, and it stayed pretty true to the original.
Right. They used both to the max. They used both types of puppetry and CGI to the benefit of both.
Yeah. So did Jim and Frank Oz alternate directing the movie?
No, Jim was directing,
okay.
And Frank was assisting. Even Frank says that. He said, Jim knew Frank wanted to learn to direct,
Mm-hmm.
or had done work on Muppet Show and some of the Muppet movies. So he wanted to give Frank the credit so that Frank could go on to doing his own directing work, which is what happened. And I have to say, Frank has done some brilliant movies since, working on Dark Crystal. What About Bob, I think, is one of the funniest and best movies ever.
Oh, yeah. It's
Little Shop of Horrors. What could be better than that? Little Shop of Horrors was phenomenal.
Those are two great movies that I love, that I grew up watching. Yeah, and I think the first movie he officially directed was The Muppets Take Manhattan.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, could be.
Yeah, I heard that when he was working with Marlon Brando on the score, the two of them didn't get along, and Brando used to call him Miss Piggy.
I have no idea.
Yeah, I laugh every time I think about that. when the Dark Crystal came out, what do you remember about the reaction towards it? Because it did pretty well at the box office that Christmas weekend. It was like 40 million it made.
Well, you know, the thing is, first of all, a lot of people took their kids to that movie thinking it was, you know, a Jim Henson Muppet movie.
Right.
And so there were a lot of kids who got terrified and ran out of the theater. And so in that way, it didn't work. But I think the appreciation for Dark Crystal came much later when it was on video. And more people saw it then, because commercially when it came out, it was not successful. And Jim was very disappointed, you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and, you know, the other thing is, which I think a lot of people don't realize, is that the movie itself was shot with a lot of gels on the lighting and a lot of smoke.
Yeah.
So a lot of the detail that we put into the movie itself and the characters and all the things that were in their environment, from their tools to their, you know, whatever they were using was lost. And I remember there was a gallery showing at the Metropolitan Opera in New York City. There's a big gallery space there. And Muppets had a show of all the work that had been done on Dark Crystal at that exhibit. And friends of mine who had seen the movie and then saw the creatures in reality, they just said, it's amazing, like what you guys did, like down to the beads that are in the Mystic's hair, all being handmade with their own little patterns in them. So it's just, the work is incredible, and you don't see it in the movie, and it's unfortunate that a lot of that stuff is missed, because it's such extraordinary work, you know? So I think that was my one regret, that, you know, like here we had spent all this time doing all this incredible detailed work, and then it kind of got glossed over, unfortunately, in the movie itself. But you can see it in still photos.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember the night it premiered on CBS, and I had seen it on video probably several months, you know, prior to that as a kid, and I was expecting it to be like, you know, a Henson movie, but it was certainly different. Yeah, and I personally, I love Labyrinth but more than the two, you know, but yeah, I mean, I thought it was a pretty good movie.
Yeah, it was. They both were in their own way, you know.
Did you get to go to the premiere or screening to see it with an audience?
Oh, Love Dark Crystal? Yeah. In Manhattan. I was back in New York City by that time. By the time the movie came out, I was back in New York working on Fraggle Rock. So, yeah, we went. My wife and I went to the premiere, and it was really cool. It was in Manhattan. It was really nice. I was a little disappointed because there were things that got cut out of the movie that I wish had been in there, but you know, but that's always the thing. It's like when you're working on a film and you do things that are really cool and extraordinary, you think, oh, I can't wait to see this on film, and then, you know, the film gets edited down and it, you know, what you thought was going to be there disappears. But that's the way it is.
Yeah, a lot of people I've met have said that they've been disappointed by certain cuts of movies that they were involved in, and, you know, they were hoping, you know, this one key scene was going to be their ticket to fame, you know.
No, it wasn't that I thought.
Yeah, I know.
It was going to be like a ticket to fame. It's just that something that you spent a lot of time working on, and then it's not there, and you go, oh no, because like I had worked on the mechanism for the Land Strider's stinger that shot out of his head. And we had built a special close-up head and to fire the mechanism out of it. And unfortunately, none of that got included in the movie. So you just go to seeing them going into battle with the Gartham, and then, first you see them without the stinger, and then the next thing is you see the stinger out and they're attacking the Gartham. You never see the actual close-up shot of it emerging from their head, but that's the way it goes.
Yeah. After this movie, you ended up designing toys for Hasbro, right?
Yeah, I worked on, that was, I think, one of the first toy sculpting jobs I got was for the Dark Crystal toys, and I did the Mystic, the Land Strider, and the Gartham. And the toys didn't come out because when the execs at Hasbro saw the movie, they said, "No, it's going to sit through this movie. We're not going to sell any toys based on this movie." That was before they realized how large the adult toy collecting, groups were.
Yeah.
Because there was no internet, so there was no discussion from the public about their want of, certain types of toys. So.
Yeah, it's a shame,
Yeah.
but it's a shame, but I mean, I seen them. They hold up. I like them.
Thanks.
Absolutely. You mentioned before about the Great Muppet Caper. That's actually my favorite Muppet movie. So what did you do on that one?
No, it was just doing puppet prep work. It's like creating background characters and nothing major, because at the same time I was still working on stuff for Dark Crystal. So it was, or being on set to just keep the puppets looking good, or fix or replace them, if one got, dirty or damaged or whatever. Was nothing special. Not like working on Dark Crystal or Fraggle Rock or, even the puppets for the Muppet Show. I think every puppet I did was kind of just like background chorus guys for pirate scenes or stuff like that. The one I did do was the anglerfish puppet for Bluefish Blues, which was performed by Louise Gold.
Oh yeah.
And they're backed up by the Gills brothers, which was a play off the Mills brothers. And it's great because not too long ago, actually at the reunion, I got to see Louise, and I had mentioned to her that, I hadn't, because I was working on Dark Crystal at the time that season of Muppet Show came out. I don't think I even had TV back then in England, because it wasn't, there was no cable television in England, and I don't think the reception that we had in our apartment was all that great for television, for commercial television. So
right.
And I didn't know that anglerfish puppet that I had carved when I was back in New York actually wound up on that season of the show. And it wasn't until years later I saw it in some video, and I go, "Oh my gosh, they actually used it." It's like I didn't even know it. You know? So it was neat to discover it. And then I was talking to Louise about it, and she said, "Oh, Tim," she said, "that was one of my favorite things I ever did on Muppet Show." She said, "because I got to be more like who I am, in singing these real bluesy songs." And I said, "Oh, that's great to know, So that was really cool.
That is cool. How about that? What did you do for Sesame Street?
Sesame Street? For Sesame Street in Kuwait, I helped create the parrot. And then there was a big bear costume that I helped construct. He was called Noamon. And then I did a year or a season of Sesame Street wrangling puppets, getting them ready for each shot. So, yeah, it's all the stuff that you start out doing when you work at Muppets before you get to actually, build things of significance.
Yeah. So you created Uncle Traveling Matt on Fraggle Rock, and I'm going to be honest with you, he was always my favorite character on that show.
Well, I built him
Uh-huh.
from drawings based on Michael Fritz's drawings,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, and what my favorite thing about Matt was his mustache and how I got it to made a little mechanism so that Dave Golds could manipulate it and change his expression and facial expressions using his mustache. It was a really simple thing and very effective.
Yeah, well,
It's great to have been part of making, help to create him, because, it's with everything at Muppets, everything is like a joint effort. So, whereas I built his hands and, his head and body and, the mechanism for his mustache, Polly Smith did a beautiful job making his costume. I think at that time we had, I can't remember who it was, maybe Joanne Green, who just made hats for the puppets. And I think she made his pith helmet. So, yeah, it's always a lot of people working on a lot of different things to make them come to fruition. And the great thing about Jim was that he gave us the time to make these things special and unique. The creative time we got to explore and experiment and find new ways of doing things was all thanks to Jim and his patience.
yeah, I like how Matt always has the safari hat on, and he's always getting tossed around big cities like New York or something.
Yeah. My favorite one is him walking through New York City and wondering why these strange creatures have to be fed every hour on the hour.
Yeah.
And how people run to feed them. And they were the parking meters. And it was just such a great, warped way of looking at the world,
Mm-hmm.
I love stuff like that. It kind of reminded me very much of Fractured Fairy Tales, which was an animated show when I was a kid.
Yeah, I remember that one. That just goes to show how warped, Jim's vision could be, with social commentary like that. And I remember the first episode of Fraggle Rock when, Matt goes into outer space. I always wanted to see an episode where he ends up in the cave with Gobo and all of them, and then he finally doesn't get tossed around. That would have been a good episode.
Well, did you see the new series?
I haven't seen.
Apple TV?
No, I haven't seen the new series yet.
Oh, you got to watch it because Matt is in the very first show.
Oh, good.
And he's in the cave with the rest of the Fraggles for the very, first time. Mm-hmm. And it was wonderful. It's really good. You go and watch it. You'll enjoy it.
I'll check it out. Yeah. That's so awesome. Yes. So after the Dark Crystal, though, did he ask you to get involved in like Labyrinth or any other projects as far as movies go?
No, I came back and I was working on Fraggle Rock, and then after Fraggle Rock, Jim had trouble selling any new projects, so he put a lot of us on freelance, and I started doing a lot more toy designing. I did a lot of toy sculpting for, different Muppet characters for Hasbro or Ideal or whatever. I did a Cookie Monster clock and all kinds of different things. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, that's when I started exploring. I had during the production of Fraggle Rock say to Jim, Jim, we're doing such, interesting things with puppets and building characters, and the toy companies just are doing such kind of dull, toys based on the puppet characters. I said, we should start a production here where we develop toy products and show them to the toy companies to show them how we can make things that are a lot more, I don't know, child-centric and a lot more imaginative and with greater play value. So when I got put on freelance staff, that's when I started exploring doing toy products myself. Mm-hmm. And Sectors was the first thing that got sold to Coleco. And then, Maureen Trotta and I worked on Boglins together. Larry Mass had been involved with Seven Towns as the agent and had worked with us on both those things. But we had a lot of other product lines that we were constantly pitching to toy companies, most of which got rejected, which is, the story of anybody who's an outside inventor for toy products. So, yeah, I just got into toy design more than puppet design. I still have done some limited puppet design. I did Slingy for Sling TV recently, who's a little mascot for Sling TV. Mm-hmm. And I did some traveling shows, puppets for a traveling show.
Obviously.
Yeah. But mostly toy work, and I ended up working for a toy and gift company in New Jersey for a while called EK Success. Mm-hmm. And because I wanted to learn more about the business of, developing product overseas in China and how things get produced. And then I went to work for Melissa and Doug Toys, designing and developing toy products for them for, quite a long time. So, and then I went back to being independent, and the relaunch of Boglins happened. Mm. And now the relaunch of Sectors is happening with Nacelle. It's amazing how everything I did, 30 years ago is coming back full cycle. And I'm working on some new toy products with Tri-Action Toys, who I did Boglins with. So we have stuff coming out over the course of the end of this year and into next year, a whole bunch of new product lines, which will be fun.
Do you like the toy making process better than the movie making process?
No, I don't have any preference over either one. Both are different creative process. The advantage of the toy products is I do most of the work on my own, so it's more immediate and quick, whereas doing film work is a long and lengthy process. Mm-hmm. But no, it's all, for me, everything is the initial creative process. The end result is not always my motivation. The motivation for me is coming up with new and interesting ideas and concepts.
Nice. Do you remember where you were when you found out that Jim had passed?
I was home in my studio, and somebody from Henson called me and told me. And I was floored. I couldn't believe it. I was like, how did that happen? It just can't be. Because all the time I knew Jim, he worked every day of the week. Very rarely he would take like a Sunday off. Mm-hmm. And I never saw him sick, ever. Mm-hmm. The whole time I worked for him. So it was like a real shock that he had died from, a bacterial infection. Is just really bad.
Yeah.
And the funeral was amazing, and how Carol Spinney as Big Bird was able to sing "It's Not Easy Being Green."
Yeah.
To this day, I was like, I'm still in awe that he pulled that off without just totally losing it, because, for Carol, Jim was everything. Jim had taken Carol out of like almost living on the streets to, giving him an incredible life, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. and very unfortunate, and anybody can only imagine where else Jim would have gone with, I think, especially with CGI, because he was at the forefront of that when it was started, computer animation. He was really interested in it and wanted to see where he could take it. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Just
I still can't believe it all these years later, and also too, he just sold the company to Disney, which boggles my mind because I like, a Muppet Christmas Carol at least, but then since then, just the Muppet movies haven't lived up to Jim's vision. I think they've been more of Disney's vision than anything.
yeah, I mean, certainly there have been some good shows. I mean, movies that have been done since Jim passed.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they have the same kind of idiocy that Jim loved so much. It's like it was always great when you would see the puppeteers do something silly or stupid,
Right.
and Jim would just lose it. And you could tell that the puppeteers loved it because they had scored. That
Yeah.
getting Jim to crack up and lose his kind of cool. But yeah, I think much of it, I think, is that Jim never wanted to be at Disney. He wanted to just be a creative person.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't want to be running this big company with all these people working for him, and I think that was part of the reason why he sold the Muppets brand off. He wanted to be the person who could change the direction of what he was doing based on his interests and not based on what, the public thought Jim should be making. So, I give him a lot of credit that he strived to be creative,
Yeah. Do you think he knew his time was short?
No. But I was surprised that he had written to his kids, but I think that's, before his passing, but I think that was because probably the legality of, ownership of a big company like that, and how do you pass it on, and, how do you give your, I don't know, I mean, Lisa was out of college and working, but, his youngest daughter was, she wasn't very old when Jim passed away. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I've seen the toys on your website. Totems, is that how you pronounce it?
Totems?
Totems.
Yeah, totems.
Totems.
Like totem pole, but play on my name.
Yeah. I like his hairiness figure. It kind of reminded me of Polynesian imagery. My stepmom's Polynesian, so I like anything of that sort.
Everybody sees something different in them, and that's what I like about it.
Yeah.
I've always been very much influenced by pre-Columbian artwork in Central America, Mexico, and South America, and I've traveled down there a lot, and I don't know why. It's really funny because recently, with the relaunch of Boglins, the toy company had asked me to write like histories of the puppets themselves, of each Boglin character, and where did they come from? How did they arrive here? And I never wanted to lock into like a specific history of them. I wanted it to be interpreted. So it's a lot of scientists and biologists and whatever writing about what they observe of boglins in their natural habitat. And I wanted that so that kids who owned them and played with them could make up their own stories and make their own, videos and stuff about what they think the boglins are. And the funny thing is, in looking up the history, I had always said that one of the influences of what the Boglins look like is from the Olmec in Mexico, who were pre-Aztec, pre-Mayan culture. And the funny thing is that I just, in doing that in the past year, found out that Olmec means rubber people. And the surrounding tribes called the Olmec because they played with a rubber ball, like a soccer ball or and they had a game based on using that ball. And so the idea that Boglins, who are made out of synthetic rubber, were based on people who were called rubber people, mm-hmm. I just think is hysterical. The coincidence is just so funny and bizarre, but wonderful. So.
Yeah. Do you ever do the Comic-Cons?
Sorry, say that again?
Do you ever do the Comic-Cons?
Yeah, I do a lot of Comic-Cons. I'm mostly on the East Coast, but now that I'm in New Mexico, I'm hoping to do one in Dallas in November, and there's going to be a Dark Crystal reunion in LA in November, and then there's Designer Con in in Anaheim. Mm-hmm. So I'll be doing those shows, and now that I'm on the West Coast, I'll probably be doing more on the West Coast, but mostly I was doing them on the East Coast.
Yeah, what's the craziest thing or most interesting thing anyone's ever asked you to sign?
To sign?
Yeah.
No, mostly it's just photographs of stuff from Dark Crystal and Boglin boxes, and yeah, that's it. Nothing. I think one of the most amazing things is we did a tour in Europe when mm-hmm. we relaunched Boglins.
Yeah.
And we were at one of the Club Jouet, which is one of the biggest toy stores in central Paris. And they have like a little courtyard, and I had a table set up there with all the Boglins. And there's a lot of Boglin fans in Europe because it was a much bigger line there than it was in the U.S. So in the U.S. it only went on for like 2.5 years, and in Europe it went on for another 7-8 years. And I was sitting there, and one of the Boglins is the Alien Boglins, which is pink. And Chris, who heads Tri-Action, said, "Tim, you really want to do a pink Boglin?" I said, "Listen, Chris, all I can tell you is I'm constantly getting women and girls who are coming up to me and saying how they love Boglins when they were little and that they're cute." And when the first time that happened, I was really surprised. I said, "Boglins are cute?" And they said, "Yeah, they're ugly cute." I said, "Oh, okay, fine." Mattel never thought that this was a product that would be geared towards girls, which is a mistake that toy companies make all the time, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And I had this alien Boglin who's pink skin toned, and this little girl who was probably, I would say, maybe 6, 7.
Yeah.
Walked up to it, picked it up, and kissed it right on the lips.
Oh.
I was just like, "Where's the photographer?" Like, that had never happened before. I've had kids who, I say, "Here, do you want to try it?" And they'll pick it up, and I'll show them how the eye mechanism works, and they play with it, and they're fascinated by, how they can move it and manipulate it. But I had never had a kid kiss it before. It was amazing.
Oh, that's sweet. Yeah, I mean the convention scene has really blown up in the last decade, and it's just like seems like everyone's doing them now. Even people who never even thought they would even be asked to one, let alone ever do them.
Mhm. Mhm.
How long have you been doing them overall now?
Doing what?
Doing the convention scene.
Oh, I don't know, maybe, the first one I did was a guy who did a Comic-Con event in Parkersburg, West Virginia. And he called me up and he said, Tim, would you be interested in coming to Parkersburg and, bring some of your new Boglins and, sign photos of stuff you did on Dark Crystal? And I said, yeah, sure. And he said, I'll fly you out and I'll put you up in the hotel and I'll pay for your meals. And I said, okay, great. And my wife, when I told her I was going to do this, she said, are you crazy? You're going to go to West Virginia? Why? And I said, well, the guy's paying for me to go, and what do I have to lose? It's just a weekend. And it was amazing. The reception I got there was incredible, and I was so, happy and surprised. And it was nice to finally meet the people who buy my things firsthand, and see how it affected them. Because as a toy designer, you're really distant from the consumer, Yeah. You don't really always get to see them interact. I mean, when Boglins first came out, I remember going to Toys R Us just to watch, to see how kids would react to them. But this is much more, intense, because you get to see how many people were influenced by, the work that you did, which is really nice, And yeah, I really appreciate being able to meet with the fan base and get to know people and hear about, their own perception of what Boglins and, the stuff I've worked on, how much it influenced them. I did Monsterpalooza in Pasadena a few years ago, I think 3 years ago.
Really?
And it's like, it was before COVID. Every special effects guy came up to me, Tim, you did Boglins? Oh, that was such a big influence on me when I was a kid. It got me into doing special effects work, blah, blah, blah. And I would always say to them, could you tell your mom I'm really sorry? Because, the special effects work, has gone down so much because of CGI that, it's unfortunate. But it seems to be making somewhat of a comeback now that people appreciate mixing the real with the CGI. So I hope it stays that way.
Yeah, I go to Monsterpalooza every year. I didn't even realize you were there 3 years ago. That was the last time I went.
Yeah, I think it's like 3 or 4 years ago. It's hard for me to remember exactly, but something like that.
Small world. Well, I hope I get to meet you at another convention someday, Tim, and I want to thank you so much for coming on today. This was a lot of fun.
Sure, I'll be in California for the big Dark Crystal reunion, and then the weekend after is Designer Con in Anaheim, and I'll be at that show also.
Well, if by a miracle I can make either one, I will surely let you know.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, you enjoy the rest of your summer, and you have yourself a great day. Be safe out there.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Well, there you have it. Tim Clarke. Ain't he a cool dude? Nice guy, huh? Man, he creates wonderment. He creates entertainment for children and for people all over the world to enjoy. Well, until next time, this is Tommy Throwback Kovac saying there's no shame in living in the past because the present sucks. Later, dudes.